And Tina, first, I'd like to ask you about the trial itself. I guess the most dramatic moment is when she gets on the stand and says that she was being tortured while in U.S. custody. She went on the stand against the advice of her lawyers. She appeared to have a very contentious relationship with the lawyers, claiming that they didn't represent her. Could you talk about that whole aspect?
Sure. You know, Aafia, when she was brought to the United States in July of 2008, August 2008, she was assigned lawyers, but there was a period of time when she did not have anyone assigned to her. The government of Pakistan stepped in and hired defense lawyers who were considered a legal dream team at the time. But by the time that had happened, Dr. Aafia had already lost complete faith in the U.S. justice system. She did not trust any court-appointed lawyers, any lawyers that were going to be assigned to her, and she insisted that she wanted to at least have access to a phone book so she could try to find her own lawyers. That was denied by the judge. The judge said, listen, there's a lot of lawyers sitting right here. We're ready to try this case, and I'm not going to give you more time to go find your own lawyer. That, I think, set the stage for a very contentious relationship where Aafia, you know, continually disavowed her lawyers, was not allowed to maintain any sort of relationship with them, and I think ultimately was denied effective assistance of counsel as a result of that, not by any mistake the lawyers made, but that was the judge's call at the time. When she took the stand against the advice of her attorneys, she clearly had a story she wanted to tell, and she had not been able to tell it during the trial. She did her best to stay, you know, within the judge's parameters of what she was allowed to talk about, because, of course, he wouldn't, though he allowed all of the evidence against her trying to portray her as a dangerous terrorist, he did not allow the defense to broach that area. So she came across, as Petra said, you know, speaking in a vacuum, and the jury didn't hear the backstory, so she may have appeared a little bit irrational in their minds because they hadn't heard that the reason she didn't know that the boy that was found with her was her son is because they had been separated 5 or 6 years ago, and she had not been allowed to see him. So a lot of the things she said seemed shocking to the jury.
Tina, can you explain how Aafia resurfaced in Ghazni in 2008?
Well,
Petra.
She was found in Ghazni with a boy who turned out to be her son, and she was suspected of being a suicide bomber. She was really just wandering around in the city of Ghazni, and she was said to have on her a slew of documents and some chemical substances, which I think some were just cosmetics. There were some chemicals also, but they were sort of bizarrely incriminating, almost what you would write into a movie script. They had words like mass casualty attack and cells, and named landmarks in New York City, and there were pictures of guns, which when we saw them in the courtroom were sort of like something that a child would really draw. They were described as a match gun that could be lit with a single match, and really not the kind of thing that I would expect a seasoned Al-Qaeda operative to have with her if she was wandering around. She turned out not to be a suicide bomber. But she was arrested, supposedly, with these documents, and she was taken to an Afghan, to the local police station, and she was, according to Afghan police who testified at the trial, she was beaten the night that she was arrested by numerous people. I think she was also caned. She was tied to a bed to restrain her. Later, she was released from the bed, and she was in a room that was divided by a curtain. It was a very small room. She was behind this curtain, and that's where she was when this shooting incident occurred. A U.S. team had been alerted to her presence. FBI officials were called in from another base in Afghanistan. They flew in the following morning to identify her and to interrogate her, and also to take her with them. That was the goal. But they were told by the Afghans that they could not do that, that they could question her, but they would not be allowed to take her. And they were ushered into this room on the second floor of the police station where she was behind that curtain, unbeknownst to them, they say. And Afghan officials were already there, some people from the Ministry of Interior and some soldiers from the police station. And that is when this shooting supposedly took place. And
I think you also mentioned in your article that the again, another bizarre aspect of this very bizarre case is that she somehow, there was a rifle that just happened to be on the floor near her, even though she was a suspected connected Lady Al-Qaeda, and they just happened to leave a rifle that she managed to grab and then attempt to shoot some of the agents.
Well, this is the most disputed part of this case, which is what happened after those U.S. soldiers and FBI agents entered that room. What is agreed upon is that they were all there. She herself testified that she moved towards the curtain to peek out to see who was there, and she intended to try to escape. She wanted to get out of there. That's what she told the jury. Now, what happened next is the big question. According to the testimony of the U.S. team, which was the soldiers and the FBI agents, they say that a warrant officer who brought his M4 automatic rifle with him set it down near the curtain, and that she somehow reached past the curtain, grabbed the gun, and aimed it at them, and actually got 2 shots off. And there were differences in the eyewitness testimony. Some of the people said they didn't see the shooting. Some said that they saw her shooting from one of the beds that was in the back of the room. Some said she was next to the bed. There were all sorts of different versions of how this happened. The room was quite small and quite crowded, so people had different vantage points. But what's interesting is that there was no forensic evidence whatsoever that she shot that gun. There were no fingerprints on the gun. There were no bullet holes in the walls. There were no casings on the floor. There was an abundance of evidence that she had been shot. They found the casings from the revolver that shot her. They found she was obviously wounded, so that was very clear. I think that clearly what happened to a certain degree is that the people in that room were startled when they saw her. And what happened next?
Well, let me ask something about the coverage of the trial, Petra. The reporters, Pakistani reporters not being allowed in. Can you explain who covered the trial and why some weren't in?
Well, before the trial actually started, there was an enormous amount of attention on this case for years and has been in Pakistan and in much of the Muslim world. And a lot of the Pakistani press came to New York City to cover the trial on a day-to-day basis. But the only credentials that were issued for the courtroom itself were for journalists who have an NYPD press pass, which is actually difficult to get, and it's meant mainly for crime scene reporters. I don't have that kind of pass either. A lot of courthouse reporters don't have that pass. But that meant that the press rows were reserved only for those people. And there were about 30 journalists who were credentialed, but they were mainly, you know, the New York City dailies, television stations, radio stations. And most of those outlets don't cover these kinds of trials from the beginning to the end. They're there for the first day, they're there for the last day, and in between the press rows were very empty. And the first day there were only 6 spaces for public seating, so everybody else was put into an overflow courtroom where they watched the proceedings on a television set. But that meant that whenever exhibits were put on the overhead projector, we couldn't see that. Some of the witnesses came down off the stand to testify in front of the jury to look at some actual drawings and sketches of the room. We couldn't really even hear them when they testified on that. So there was a limited amount of ability to get to the courtroom. The press was, I have to say, the Pakistani press was eventually let into the courtroom because I think the judge realized that there were not many people covering the case inside the courtroom, but they never really received the actual credentials that would give them that right to be there every day.
What has changed in dealing with terror suspects from Bush to Obama? Tina Foster.
Surprisingly little, unfortunately, I think. You know, in terms of the challenges that are faced by this country in repairing its image internationally, I think that President Obama has done a much better job in terms of articulating the, you know, a more neutral, friendly, positive approach. However, for those of us, like myself at the International Justice Network, who have been working on secret prisoner cases, people detained at Bagram instead of Guantanamo. All of these issues are a repeat, unfortunately, of what we saw under the Bush administration. So I think that this trial in particular of Aafia Siddiqui is one that is going to be watched in Pakistan quite. It's already of monumental significance in Pakistan.
And she faces now possible life in prison sentence?
Yeah, she faces a potential life sentence. The sentencing won't happen for several months. But in the interim, we see that the Pakistani media and community are extremely upset, and they think that this is a travesty of justice because, of course, they have seen the 6 years of backstory and have been following this from the beginning, and they view Dr. Aafia as a torture victim, as someone who symbolizes the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who've disappeared as part of the U.S.-led war on terror.